Hello and welcome to another edition of Hypnosis Helps. An unusual edition in many respects. The first is that this show, normally my show is recorded and then broadcast, but this show is live. And so if any of you listening to this during the course of the show have any questions that you want to ask, anything that that arises as a result of anything that you hear me talk about, you're welcome to call. Now, I believe, although I should have checked this out with the guys back there, that the number, which I see in front of me, 860-440-3154, there it is on the screen, is one that you can call. So if you want to call, I will take calls on the air. Well, it's been a long time since I've made a show. As you might have guessed, for quite a long period of time, this studio was closed. And as were many other things. We are living through and witnessing very, very unusual times, unprecedented, I would say. I can't think of any period of history in which more or less the whole world was, and is, still to some degree at least now, shut down for a long period of time. This has caused many, many changes, many disruptions in people's lives, and the aim of this show that I've really making specifically for this very unusual time period is to discuss how hypnosis can help in these very strange, very unusual times. Now, before I get into all the details, I wanted to share with you a story because I think this story illustrates very much the condition that many of us find ourselves in. I was with my two young children, my two young boys, outside at a local beach. If you don't know, this is being broadcast to you from southeastern Connecticut, which is where I live. And it was a local beach in a local town, a small beach by a river in a place called Mystic. And the beach was not especially crowded. There were just a few people there. And as is my wont, I talked with people there. And one of the first people that I spoke with was a young couple, I would guess probably in their early 30s. They had two children. One was 6, I believe, and the other a little bit 3 years old. So fairly young children. And I asked them where they were from, where they lived, if they were local to the area, and they said they weren't, that they travelled up from New York City. And that was of some interest for me because I spent quite a lot of my life living in New York. And so I asked them just casually where they were from. And they were living in Manhattan in an apartment. And as I'm sure many of you know, Manhattan itself has undergone all sorts of turbulence and changes, and there's lots of things that have happened. But the thing that shocked me the most was the thing that they next told me, which was that they had not left their apartment in 4 months. 4 months. And even the wealthiest people in Manhattan, and I don't think these people were especially wealthy. They described their work and jobs a little bit, but even the wealthiest people in Manhattan live in fairly small apartments, unless they're super wealthy, of course. And I couldn't believe, it was almost incredible to me to understand how this young couple and their two children could have spent 4 months inside. Now, whether you agree that they should have done that or not, or whatever you view the policies and what's currently happening now, however you view it, that's the situation that they were in. And that's what occurred to them. And one of the things they told me was that they specifically come out as far as, because I'm guessing that took them about 2 hours or so, perhaps a little bit more, to drive to this particular beach. And they said that they were actually freaked out about being amongst people, that they found it initially very unnerving. Physically, if you looked at them, both of them looked extraordinarily pale. They looked like ghosts. I mean, people that hadn't seen the sun, I'm guessing, in 4 months, a long, long period of time. Now, that's a difficult enough situation for adults to deal with, but they had these 2 children, 6 and 3. And these children, they were happily playing, but they were noticeably nervous about interacting with anybody at all. They really hadn't seen anybody in a long period of time. Now, during the course of my time at the beach, I got talking to a couple of sets of couples, and surprisingly, again, they weren't local. One was from, again, New York, and the other couple were from Boston, also with 2, each of them had 2 children. And they were constantly telling their children that they couldn't interact with anybody else, or if they did, it had to be at a distance of more than 6 feet. One of the children said that they wanted to play in a certain area, but the parents wouldn't permit this because they believed it was a hazard for them to move and play in a certain area. So there was this extraordinary occurrence on the beach where the children were in sort of isolated pockets, not being able to move around each other and play with each other. Now again, this program isn't about discussing the merits or otherwise of that policy, or whether the people were correct in doing that, or about mask wearing or anything like that. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm really here because I want to talk about hypnosis in relation to the effects that this has and is continuing to have on people, and how hypnosis can help, and how I believe hypnosis may be a very, very valuable tool in helping people live through this very unusual time. So what's happening there, first of all? Well, the first thing is isolation. The thing that was striking to me is that some people, not everyone, but some people had been extremely isolated. Now, we live in a very unusual time in the sense that we have more means of communication at our beck and call than probably any age in the past. All of us have phones, multiple ones. Actually, I just realised that mine are still on, so if you hear them ringing on the air, which they might, I apologise. Most of us are connected via our phones or various other electronic devices to others where we can speak, we can text. And one of the notable things that I have observed and commented upon about our age is that despite the fact that we have an enormous increase in the means of communication, in some strange way, isolation seems to have increased. One of the things that I've observed is that people very often use the various forms of communication, texts, emails, messaging of various sorts, to actually distance themselves from people rather than enhance their ability to communicate with people. Probably the exact opposite of the way in which these things were conceived. And I actually have some people that have seen me because they have anxiety about speaking on a telephone. So speaking on a telephone becomes a cause of anxiety, so they say when they come. However, these times have produced forms of isolation, the like of which I don't think we've seen in modern times. And again, I can't think of a historical era when this has been not only so long but so widespread across this country and of course many other countries. effectively, some people have put themselves in a form of house arrest for weeks and months, as this young couple had. And again, I'm not here to debate the merits of whether that's a good thing for them to do or not a good thing for them to do. I'm really here to talk about what the effects of that may be. And one of the basic effects of isolation is a kind of a sadness and a loneliness. We are by nature social creatures. And so putting ourselves in a situation where we have little or no opportunity to interact in person with other people naturally produces a form of loneliness. And that loneliness can lead to anxiety and depression. Of course, I know there are some people who thrive on that type of isolation, but these tend to be relatively few. Even though a lot of us, even before what's occurred, conducted our work from home for certain periods of time, most of us, adults, had the opportunity to interact with other people at work, in social gatherings. Of course, children would go to school, and at this time of the year, children would go to camps. There are still some summer camps and other social activities going on, but they're far more limited and restricted than they had hitherto been. So we are looking at an enormous change in how people interact with each other across the world. The current recommendation is that people maintain what's called a social distancing of 6 feet. Now, I'm one of those people that believe that that's actually a misnomer. It's not really social distancing that we're being asked to do, it's physical distancing. Why the term social distancing was used, I don't exactly know. But I think the use of the term has, as many things do, a suggestive effect upon the mind, that we distance ourselves socially, not just physically, as a theoretically preventative measure for the spread of an illness. And this has meant that people, I believe, inside are distancing themselves as well, which increases isolation. Now, figures are still being gathered on the current condition of people's mental and emotional health across the country. And that's an ongoing process. The media and the attention of the country has been largely focused on one specific illness, a physical illness. And relatively little has been said about the effects of that isolation, the so-called social distancing, which I prefer to think of as physical distancing, and the various other changes that have occurred in people's lives on them mentally and emotionally. But the indications are that mental illness in its various forms and classifications has increased significantly. One of the things that, as far as we can gather, that has increased significantly is the rate of suicide. And suicide is a complex thing, and I'm not saying that I believe anyone truly has the answer as to exactly why people at any one time take their lives. But it's difficult for me to believe that this whole social scenario, these new social rules that we find ourselves in, hasn't, to some perhaps considerable degree, increased people's anxiety, causing depression, worry. And the worry takes many forms. One of the things that I've heard again and again, and I'm sure you've all heard, is that what we're experiencing is being described in various terms as the new normal, whatever that phrase means. It's a phrase I prefer not to use because I don't really know what it means, and I don't think anybody knows what it means. It's an attempt to predict the future perhaps, or mollify our attitude towards the present conditions. But we have become acclimated to a completely different set of social rules. I don't know when you're viewing this, it might be months or years after, obviously this show's being broadcast live, but any recordings when this has happened. So this might all seem very strange to you, but it's currently happening now. We are restricted as to whether we can meet in groups depending upon what part of the country you're in. If we go to a supermarket, we're told we have to walk through a certain path. We have to go down one aisle and up another one. We can't choose where we go. We have to wear masks when we are inside buildings in close proximity to others. I'm not with anybody else in this studio, but the rules of the studio currently is if you come into their environs, you have to wear a mask. They were the only conditions under which they were allowed to continue to operate. And so all of these things are enormous changes in our lives. And again, this produces different forms of anxiety. The status of the workplace has changed enormously. As I speak to you, unemployment figures are at record highs, although some parts of the economy appear to be doing very well. I believe Mr. Jeff Bezos, who, as I do this, is the head of Amazon, has increased his wealth some $30 billion during the course of this thing. So not everybody's doing badly as a result of what's happening here. And some businesses have seen a rise in their business. But for others, it's been very difficult and almost catastrophic. And what that has led to is various forms, again, of anxiety. Worry about the future. Worry about whether people are going to have a job. Worry about whether schools are going to start, and if they are not going to start, how people are going to be able to conduct their work and look after their children at home. And so what I've been seeing in my practice is people calling up, and by the way, we're just starting to get back into operating again, contacting me with a whole range of problems, many of which are fear-based, I believe. I'm witnessing a rise in people calling about anxiety. I'm witnessing a rise in people calling about addiction. Again, this doesn't really surprise me because in isolation, with increased anxiety, with a lack of purpose, the likelihood, in my opinion, of addictive behaviours increasing is likely. So for all these reasons, we are going through, I would say, a crisis of emotions, overall of mental health. Now, the mental health industry, and when I say that, I'm speaking specifically of counsellors and therapists, and I want to make it clear, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a therapist, I'm a hypnosis practitioner. But that industry has tried to move online to conduct sessions via various online media, things like Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or the equivalent, to conduct sessions. And I'm sure that has helped alleviate problems for some people. But I think most therapists agree that nothing really is as effective as an in-person meeting where one person meets with another. Now, some hypnosis practitioners, like myself, have conducted sessions online. Many years, or rather even over the phone or via, again, Skype or Zoom or some equivalent. I made it my practice, and I still believe, not to do that. I haven't done that because I've long maintained that it is very, very important for me to watch the subtle movements of people, how they're communicating. It's a very fine communication. And the prospect of me conducting a hypnosis session with somebody over the phone or by Skype or Zoom or something, and there being a lost connection or something occurring, which can occur, and I can't deal with it as one human being to another, frankly terrifies me from a work standpoint, and so I won't conduct sessions in that way, although people have asked me to do so. Just now we started to get back to circumstances where we can conduct sessions again. I don't conduct as a hypnosis practitioner at this point in my practice group sessions. So again, my sessions are done one-to-one. So there's what we're faced with. There's the scenario. So then the question comes, how can hypnosis help as far as this is concerned? Well, of course, I'm not proposing for a moment that hypnosis can help with the physical aspects of what we are facing. But I do believe that hypnosis has a role to play in the mental and emotional aspects of what we are encountering. Now, let's take a few examples and I'll begin to describe how it can help. Well, one of the things that I have long taught people is using hypnosis to manage stress. Stress in more extreme forms leads to anxiety. Anxiety is often the result of deeply held fears. And those deeply held fears may become irrational, leading to phobias. At each of those junctures, hypnosis has a role to play. So let's take them from the beginning of those. One of the things that I teach people is how to use hypnosis to manage stress. The most damaging form of stress, in my opinion, is the unseen stress. When we are encountering something which is stressful and that we know it's stressful, we can deal with it. A simple example, if I'm encountering an individual who's angry at me or is using harsh words towards me, that naturally produces stress. Most adults have the option of being able to deal with that, perhaps remove themselves from the situation, use something to calm down. We've got conscious mind actions that we can take. The most damaging forms of stress are the underlying forms of stress, the sort of thing that keeps people awake at night, and they don't even exactly know why. It's an accumulation of stressful matters. And what we're seeing at the moment is an accumulation of stressful matters. The isolation, the uncertainty, the confusion over what is the correct actions to take, the constantly changing advice that we receive from various authorities, the various forms of disruption that are being caused in different areas of our life as a result of everything that we're experiencing. Now, again, hypnosis can't change the social outlook. That's not what its role is. What it can do is enable you as an individual to be able to manage and cope with the emotions that are rising in you, perhaps emotions of fear, guilt, shame, worry, concern, leading to various illnesses. It can help you ameliorate those to an enormously powerful degree. If we go on to the next level and we talk about levels of anxiety, once again, what I've found in my practice is that rather than anxiety being a general thing, which is where it often presents and how it presents itself to individuals, and that's my phone, which I'm going to see, this is a live show, I'm going to take the liberty of, yep, there's a potential client calling me now. So I'm going to end that call, and unless I don't think she knows I'm on the air. My apologies. There we are. Now you know it's live. I have two phones, one personal, one social. It's really strange that person called at that time, because again, she was somebody that I met, and she described the whole change in what's occurring, the anxiety as what's occurring in her life as a result of what's happening. And when she found out what I did, she immediately wanted to know if I could help her. Now, of course, I know that there are other things that can help with anxiety and stress. People are prescribed medications, certain forms of talk therapy help, of course. But where it's found that those things don't answer or don't meet the bill, sometimes hypnosis can be extremely powerful and important in helping those, because the anxiety usually has a cause. There's a reason for it. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't just exist in thin air, as it were. One of the beliefs in my practice is that you feel what you feel and you do what you do for a reason. Unfortunately, that reason isn't always apparent. If the reason was in your conscious mind, then you'd be able to address those things. But sometimes the reasons are in your subconscious mind, and because they are subconscious, beneath the level of consciousness, a tool such as hypnosis, which deals with the subconscious mind, is able to get to the places other therapies sometimes cannot reach, or usually can't reach, and so alleviate it. Now, you might say, well, you know, if we're being isolated and at home and we're under certain restrictions as to how we travel, who we visit, who we meet with, whether our children attend school or social gatherings or whatever, hypnosis can't help with that. And it's true, hypnosis doesn't help with that. But when you are living under the dominion of ongoing stress, ongoing worry, then the capacity of hypnosis to alleviate that means that you have an opportunity to reevaluate your circumstances and to see what you can do. So one of the things that I've noticed with some of my clients who have practiced these methodologies is I am frankly humbled by the extraordinarily positive outlook that many of them are maintaining through this disruptive period of our lives. Many of them are finding that they are using the time that they have to further their educational accomplishments, catch up with the reading of books that they've wanted to read in a long period of time, working on their homes, working on aspects of their jobs and that they haven't had opportunities to do so, interacting very, very positively with their children. And this has been extremely helpful. Why have they been able to respond in this positive way? Because they have a means, using the stress relieving, including the self-hypnotic techniques that they've learnt from me, to lower the level of stress and evaluate their situation from a standpoint of greater ease, greater comfort, greater self-confidence, greater self-belief. The next stage that people go to after anxiety is deep fears. And I think if there's one thing that I'm seeing mostly when I see people across, one powerful negative emotion is deep, deep set fears. Now, just going to the other end of a fear, what's a phobia? Well, a phobia is an irrational fear. It's not fear. Fear is a protective mechanism. If we had no fear, then that would be detrimental. Fear protects us because the purpose of fear is for us to take action where there is something that is truly fearful. We escape from it. If we have to and don't have any choice, we fight it or we hide from it. That's the purpose of fear. It's to alert us to something. Phobia is an irrational fear. You know, somebody develops a fear of coffee cups or people drinking coffee. One of the people on the beach that I spoke to described the fact that their 2 young children had now developed a phobia of going into a vehicle, into a car. Even after continuous assurance from their parents and others that they were in no danger, they'd picked up the idea that everything outside that they were being taken to was very, very dangerous and life-threatening. My guess is that they'd overheard conversations by their parents talking about what we're currently experiencing, and children being children didn't understand how to interpret this or judge it, and came to the belief that going outside in anywhere was absolutely hazardous to them. So they developed a form of agoraphobia, which is very surprising in such young children. Again, I'm sure they're not the only ones. So, how does hypnosis help there? Well, you've heard me describe on other shows, if you've watched other shows, that one of hypnosis' strengths and stars is the capacity to deal very, very effectively with fears and phobias. I've dealt through the course of the years in my practice with many, many, many types of fears and phobias. And the consistent thing that I see in fears and phobias is basically a fear of the feeling of fear arising. Fear debilitates when it's allowed to reign unchecked. Fear is an emotion that's supposed to alert us to a present danger, and having alerted us to take action, it's supposed to pass. But if we find ourselves in a state of ongoing fear, then it affects our judgment and affects our mental health and eventually affects our physical health. And regardless of the measures that have been taken, and regardless of what your view as to whether these measures that have been taken have merit or do not have merit, if people live in a state of ongoing fear, then it's going to have an effect upon them. It's going to have an effect upon their families. It's going to have an effect upon those they interact with. It's going to have an effect upon their work colleagues, their clients, their children. And if you multiply this effect across the nation, and perhaps even the world, then we are probably observing a climate of fear unlike any that's been observed in human history. I know of no more powerful tool than deep hypnosis in alleviating deep fear. And once again, one of the things that has been noticeable in my clients is the fact that they have managed to navigate themselves through this time period and largely free of these debilitating and overwhelming fears. So there are some other things that occur, and some other things where hypnosis can help. Now, I've noticed another effect, and again, what I've noticed, I'm just talking about my personal observations. I'm not talking about any wide-scale statistical measure. I'm simply talking about what happens when people call me up and ask for help. Now, as I've mentioned on this show, people usually contact me when other forms of help just haven't been effective. It's fairly rare that people come to a hypnosis practitioner as a first port of call for anything, and that's natural. It's the sort of work that I do is unusual, and usually people don't think of it in the first instance unless they've previously had some positive experience with hypnosis. Now, one of the things that you've heard me mention on other shows is trauma, and probably the most commonly understood form of trauma, although there are others, are post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD as it's abbreviated to. I'm sure you've heard of it if you're watching this. My guess is you probably know somebody who's had it, or who has a relative who suffers from it. And one of the things that I have noticed is more people are calling me up and asking me if I can help them with that than I've ever seen before. Now, it's difficult again for me to believe that that is not partially as a result of all the circumstances that we currently find ourselves in. Now, the common understanding of PTSD is that it's triggered or it arises as a result of some traumatic event that somebody is subject to, or on occasion somebody witnesses, or is on some occasions actually perpetrates themselves. The commonly understood thing is, for example, a soldier who finds him or herself in a battle scenario or under tremendous stress, or whose life is threatened, or unfortunately finds themselves in a situation where they may have to, because of the nature of their work, take the life of another person. And these things cause stress. Now, as you've heard me say on the show before, one of my contentions is that these events in themselves are not necessarily the cause of the stress. They are the trigger for other things that are from the earlier part of people's lives, because it's not the events themselves, because different people will have different responses to almost identical events. It's the perception of the person who becomes stressed, traumatized, of the event. And that perception is governed by things and events that have happened earlier in their life. So as it were, these traumatic events lay on top of a perceptive base. Now, what's the chief thing that hypnosis does? Well, one person could say, and I think it's a fair comment, it changes perception. It can change perception more powerfully and more deeply, once again, than almost anything I know, perhaps with the exception of certain psychotropic drugs. But unlike psychotropic drugs, it doesn't have unpleasant side effects. It doesn't have damaging effects upon the organism. It's a very safe practice. Now, because it has the capacity to change perception, that means that in treating any form of anxiety, traumas, deeply based fears, it has the capacity to enable people to go back to earlier times, scenes and places through the hypnotic process, to clear feelings, emotions and sensations that those events trapped in the organism, and having done that, to give them the opportunity to reevaluate what they experienced. Sometimes these things that I call initial sensitizing events that traumatize people are events that have occurred very, very, very early on in their life. Sometimes so early that it's beyond the capacity of ordinary conscious memory, but is within the capacity of hypnosis to reach, because hypnosis can reach beyond conscious memory, sometimes to extremely early memories from very early childhood. Sometimes the traumatic event that they experienced in early childhood wouldn't seem traumatic to an adult, but was traumatic to them at a time. And I can give an example of how I've encountered this now during this course of this strange time period. I worked with somebody recently who came to me because they were feeling great anxiety and stress, and they were very, very concerned about going out. And even though they took precautions which they felt were reasonable and rational, and they didn't feel that they initially had great fear, they were almost paralysed in their capacity to interact and leave their home, and it was distressing them entirely. I suggested that she come to the office, and we did a session. And what was discovered, which is something similar that I've discovered many times, is that when I brought her into hypnosis and used the process that I call healing hypnosis by regression to cause, we found ourselves back in a scenario from childhood where she had been left alone by her parents when she was very young and couldn't understand why she had been left alone. Now, as far as I can tell from the situation, nothing traumatic had happened to her other than the sense that she could not understand why she had been left alone, and this caused her great fear and anxiety. It wasn't difficult to see the connection between what she's currently experiencing, because a part of her subconscious mind is saying, when you're alone, when you're isolated, when you can't interact with other human beings, it's not good. You need to do something about it. This is bad. Avoid it. And yet, of course, her rational mind, her conscious mind, is simultaneously at war with that part, saying to her that, well, she needs to do certain things. And this conflict has created enormous anxiety. And so I was grateful that I was able to discover this with her, because having, reassessed the situation from early childhood, released the old trapped emotions connected with that, reformulated the judgment, she found that as she moved forward in the hypnotic process, which we call from regression to progression, she was able to completely change her outlook, her views, her belief about what she's currently experiencing means. And because she was able to do that, she was able to go outside. She was able to interact. She was able to lead her life more fully and more completely. Now, I'm still working with her. One of the things about hypnosis is it's not the case that you can just do things in one session. But unlike other forms, unlike some forms of talk therapy, by contrast, it's not necessary for that person to keep coming to see me again and again and again. But one of the things that I do with almost all of my clients is I show them the process of self-hypnosis and how to use that process to alleviate stress and anxiety. And this client has learnt the first steps of that process and is seeing enormous changes in her outlook and changes in her physical health as well. So, this is the message that I have for you. In dealing with these extraordinary times of change, where we may have to reevaluate our lives, our work, our social interactions, our children's education, and all the other things that are happening in the world, you can have access to an extremely powerful tool. The most powerful tool, because the tool gives you access to the most powerful part of yourself, which is your subconscious mind. And in giving you access to that part of yourself, you have the capacity to change your perceptions about things. To change your perceptions so you don't feel that you have to live in a world, an internal world I mean, of excessive fear and stress and concern. And by the same token, not also to hold out a hope that everything's going to exactly go back to the way it is, because of course we don't know exactly how things are going to transpire or what's going to happen. None of us know. It's changing on a daily basis. We don't know. So the capacity to be able to not just calm oneself, but to get to the very cause and roots of certain fears and certain anxieties and certain causes of stress internally, I believe is one of the greatest capacities and tools that you could possibly have in bringing you through this unusual and stressful time, and a tool that you will have, if you learn it and practice it and work with a hypnosis practitioner, a tool forever, a tool that can't be taken away from you, that's not dependent upon the presence of any other person once you've learnt these tools, and something that I'm strongly suggesting that you find a good hypnosis practitioner to help you with. Maybe that practitioner will be me. If it is, I look forward to helping you and working with you. And I wish everybody physical, mental and emotional health and happiness during this time. And to remember that hypnosis can help you as it's helped tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people experiencing difficulties or stress of many sorts through many ages and many cultures and many times. That's it. Thank you very much for tuning into this live edition of Hypnosis Helps, and see you the next time. Thanks for joining me. This is Neil Myers, hypnosis practitioner in Connecticut, saying goodbye.